I said I was innocent, but I've been secretly meeting my ex in a hidden forest retreat, and saying it that plainly makes my ribs feel like a picket fence I'm climbing in a skirt. I'm Jade, 34, and I'm a wildlife acoustic ecologist. My job is to hide quiet microphones in loud landscapes and convince funders that a forest's health can be measured by how many different songs survive the dawn. Which is a poetic way of admitting I spend a lot of time alone making graphs out of bird gossip and frog arguments and pretending that's the same thing as a stable life. On paper, I have the sort of existence that looks like a brochure. A small apartment with plants that forgive me. A patient partner named Lewis, 36, a primary school teacher who always has glitter on him somewhere like it's a pollen he can't shake. A grant I fought for that pays me to map sound in threatened habitats across our state, which means I own more rechargeable batteries than a small theater and can tell you which frog species is complaining in the ditch after rain. I am extremely good at calibrating microphones and pretending my heart is a piece of equipment. The hidden forest retreat is not on any map tourists will see. We call it the Hermitage, which is dramatic but earned. It's a timber cabin with an iron roof and a deck that slants just enough to make mugs glide if you're not paying attention. It sits an hour down a logging road that forgot its job, then another 30 minutes along a track that used to be a bridle path and is now a ribbon of stubborn green. The creek nearby hums like a window unit from the 90s. If you go at dusk, you can watch the fruit bats count themselves. There's a long nail hammered into the doorway at eye level, and every scientist who passes through hangs something on it. Field tags, a lucky cap, once a charm bracelet with one missing charm. The nail smells like ambition and metal. My ex is Finn. He's a carpenter and an amateur luthier. He makes guitars that look like they want to tell the truth. We were together from 26 to 30, a stretch of years shaped like a river. Clear beginnings, dangerous middles, a widening at the end where everything felt possible and somehow still narrowed into the sea. With Finn I learned how to hear cedar drying, how to coax a curve out of stubborn wood, how to let a breakfast go cold because your hands are doing something irretrievable with a chisel. With me he learned to listen for coals at 4 a.m., to hold his breath when a lyrebird decides to impersonate a chainsaw. We loved each other greedily and then responsibly and then not enough in the right places. We broke because I took a job that kept me camping near culverts for weeks at a time, and he said he needed to build somewhere with a letterbox and a neighbor to complain about. The last fight smelled like eucalyptus and varnish and a promise neither of us could afford. We didn't speak for a year, which is exactly how long you can go before memory gets bold and sends a message as if you owe it rent. He texted late on a Wednesday when I was labeling micro SD cards by headlamp at the kitchen table. "Do you still count Dawn as a friend?" he wrote. I stared at the message like it had come to the wrong house, then typed, "Only the parts that don't drink." He sent a pinned location with no explanation, just the red teardrop floating in green nothing, and wrote, "New annex near the Hermitage. Builders didn't ruin the creek. You should hear the frogs." I told myself I'd go for work. I told myself the last time we stood on that deck we were scientists and adults and could remain both. I told Lewis the truth that wasn't all the truth. 2 nights at the Hermitage to check the loggers haven't gotten cheeky with the boundary line. Might be out of signal. He nodded the nod of a man who trusts that absence is not a performance, kissed my hair, and asked if I'd eat the granola he packed this time instead of donating it to ants. "I'll try," I said, feeling like the ants already knew. Driving to the Hermitage is like reverse tuning a violin. Civilization loosens. The angles get kind. At the turnoff a faded sign says "No access" and then in smaller letters "Unless." The track narrows to a conversation. The gums throw shadows that look like advice. I parked where we always park, 2 tire ruts beside a wattle that is determined to be cheerful, and hiked the last half hour with my kit clacking like a modest percussion section. When the cabin came into view, the roof flashed its old man grin through the trees and my heart said that sound it makes at the end of a long exhale. Finn stood on the deck with a mug and the same serious shoulders. He'd grown a beard like he'd misread a manual. He waved the way people wave when they're barefoot at home and ashamed of exactly nothing. I felt the stupid wave rise in my own arm and let it happen. "Hey, Sound Witch," he said. "Hey, Wood Priest," I said, because our nicknames always make us feel more like professions than mistakes. We hugged like adults who wanted to pass a physical without notes. And then we didn't talk about why I was really there because the creek had things to say. I set up 2 meters from the banks, under that she-oak that always drops its needles like thin confetti. The frogs were in full complaint mode, Latoria Wingy doing that ee like someone telling you a secret 6 houses away, Crinia signifera clicking like an old powerboard, a pubblebonk or two throwing their gulping bass from under silt. Finn handed me the mug. Tea tasted like the deck I could trip on. We worked because that's how you hide from a conversation and still feel virtuous. I checked the recorder schedules, replaced batteries, made notes on the sheets that live on the clipboard with the bite out of it, a wombat-long story. He pointed out a few new nests he'd found, a brush-tailed possum who had developed a taste for our soap, the tiny hut he'd helped build further up the ridge, perched like a secret with permission. We didn't say, "I missed you." We said, "They've been logging on the north slope hit and the creek mouth moved with the last rain, it's sulking." The word we didn't say kept leaning in, like a curious neighbor pretending to water her plants. The hidden annex was new to me. A single-room cabin with a window where the world comes to perform, a table with scars from honest tools, a bed I tried not to see. "You built this?" I asked, because sometimes the obvious is a rope you hand the moment so it doesn't slip away. He shook his head. "I just taught them how to shut up the nails." I laughed because it's an inside joke from another life. He used to say most buildings creak because the nails gossip at night. We didn't touch. We did proximity like professionals. We took the old trail to the lookout and let our calves complain. At the top we saw blue that looked like someone had edited the saturation on the horizon. We ate his ridiculous homemade jerky and my adequate dried mango. We said nothing about the road back to real life. We counted swifts. We listened to the lyrebird mocking an engine it hated. That first night I slept in the hermitage on the musty sofa with the blanket that knows more secrets than I do. I woke twice to check the recorders out of habit and fear and need. The dawn chorus did what it always does, arrived like a rumor, then a meeting, then a rally you'd forgotten you RSVP'd to. I smiled into the old cushion and cried a ridiculous, clean little cry because I am a scientist but I am not immune to first light showing off. Back in town that week, life kept its steady drum. Lewis made pasta that tasted like a promise. I filed a report. I folded laundry into stacks that felt like I was building small cities. I told myself the Hermitage was a one-off revisit, an audit of a past life with good acoustics. Then Finn sent a voice note of rain on the tin roof and a kookaburra laughing right on top of the MIC like a heckler, and my body lit up in that embarrassing way only people in poems admit to. He followed with, "I'm going back up next weekend to brace the annex against the southerlies. Could use 4 hands." I typed, "I'm teaching a workshop Saturday because I was." Then I typed, "But I can drive up Sunday." If you're waiting for me to justify it with a big hole in my marriage, I won't. Lewis is kind like scaffolding, the kind of kindness you don't notice until you lean on it. He's not inattentive or boring or cruel. He's funny. He dances like a dad already, yes, but he makes kids feel like science is magic and magic is science and both are within reach if you ask nicely and wash your hands. He doesn't deserve a wife with a secret annex. He deserves a wife who treats honesty like a first language. I will not make him a villain to feel interesting. The second trip felt like a dare I'd already lost. We fell into old competence again. He planed timber. I fixed the broken bracket on the solar panel with the little kit he always forgets he owns. He said he still has the blue shirt I hated because it made him look like a sad accountant in a barn. I said I still have the teacup with the crack shaped like Tasmania. He asked if I was eating the granola. I said the ants wrote me a thank you note. The moment we fell happened just after dark when the creek decided to pretend it was a train. The lantern threw those tender wobbling shadows. A moth the size of my foolishness battered itself against the glass. I stood to stretch, he reached past me for the screwdriver, our arms brushed and the room fell very quiet. I could narrate the rest like a novel or a clinical report, neither would make it better or worse. We kissed like we had knowledge now. Like we knew someone would pay for the light. Afterward, I lay there listening to the bells of my guilt ring in an odd, beautiful pattern, like the village is far away but the air remembers. I thought we weren't going to do this. I said into his shoulder. We weren't, he said. We did. We can't again, I said, because agreements are how I trick myself into thinking I control the wind. He nodded into my hair. We'll be better tomorrow, he said, the dumbest, truest sentence. Driving home, the track proved itself again and again. The sign said, no access, and I drove right past it carrying a story that refused to fit in the glove compartment. I stopped at the servo for petrol and an iced coffee the color of denial, and the cashier said, back from the bush, and I said, yep, with a smile I hate on my face because it looks exactly like other women's smiles I promised I wouldn't borrow. For a month we became a pattern. I told Lewis there were calls from landholders who needed training in passive recording. I told my team I preferred working Sundays because bird data loves unpopular days. I told myself no, and then yes, and then the particular sigh that isn't a word but does so much heavy lifting. Finn and I built an annex shelf out of Buhl oak that will probably survive longer than either of us. We cooked on that foolish little two-burner like we were auditioning for a show about simplicity that doesn't make you smug. We didn't say go or stay or instead. We were better than teenagers and worse than saints. Maya, my best friend since we were both 19 and brave about bad eyeliner, noticed. She's a botanist. She can detect drought on your face at 20 meters. We were in a lab with the sort of lighting that makes everyone look guilty, and she was unpacking samples while I pretended my spreadsheet was its own ethics committee. Your mouth is in italics, she said. Explain. I shrugged. Fieldwork has been fieldwork. She raised one eyebrow, the intimidation eyebrow. I'm not a cop, she said. I'm your continuity editor. If the plot has changed, let me update the timeline. I almost told her. Then I made a joke about frog dialects. She didn't laugh. Call me when you want me to drive you somewhere you shouldn't go, she said. Or to drive you away from somewhere you shouldn't stay. The day the story turned wearing a fluorescent vest, Lewis said casually over his pile of graded spelling worksheets, the Year 4s are doing a unit on maps and secrets. I told them the best kind of secret is one you're building into a surprise party, not the kind that needs a password on your face. He said it like a man describing a cloud. He looked up and smiled like it didn't apply to us. My whole body went too hot and then too cold, like a thermometer dropped in tea. Cute, I said, and it came out like a squeak from a hinge I should have oiled. That night, I lay awake in the grey gap before dawn thinking about the nail in the hermitage doorway, about all the little offerings hung there by people who walked in wanting a version of themselves they could tolerate. I thought about the audio files on my hard drive, the dawn choruses and the midnight bickers and the hush between, and how you can zoom in on a waveform and see there's always more happening than your ears can admit. I thought about Lewis's glitter and Finn's sawdust and how both get in your lungs if you aren't careful. The next time I went up, I didn't pack my recorder. I told myself I was giving the forest a rest from surveillance. The annex felt like a confession booth. Finn was already there, barefoot, holding a piece of paper like he wasn't sure which side had the instructions. I got an offer, he said before hello. A workshop in Tasmania. 12 weeks at a timber cooperative, learn new joinery, teach, build a community hall that wants to be sung in. I said yes. I leave in a month. The sound in my chest was a kookaburra swallowing a clock. That's good, I said, because it was. It is, he said. I wanted you to know now, not from a message that sounds like a tourist. We didn't pretend this made anything easier. We did the opposite. We talked like we were on a ridge yelling across a creek. He said he wishes the parts of us that fit didn't come packed with other parts. I said I wish my courage wasn't so good at pretending to be logistics. He said he sees a version of us that wrote a different grant, a different workshop, a different living room. I said I see it too, and it lives right next to the version where the rainforest grows back in a month. We laughed like people performing, not drowning. We did not sleep together. We slept near each other like two fire hazards with good intentions. In the morning we walked the track up to the place where the gum with the white scar leans into the wind like it knows a joke. We stood without touching. A lyrebird did his ridiculous symphony, magpie, car alarm, chainsaw, a sneeze. I recorded it on my phone like a civilian. I said. When you go, can you leave me the blue shirt? He nodded. It's ugly. I know, I said. It tells the truth. On the way back to town, I stopped at Maya's. I said the sentence that tasted like bark. She didn't slap me or hug me. She poured tea like a ritual and said, "How do you want to tell Louis?" I stared at my hands. "I want to skip to forgiveness." She snorted. "You don't even get to skip the kettle." We sat at her kitchen table and wrote bullet points like we were collecting seeds. She made me practice the sentences that would not try to make me the hero. I wasn't a victim, I said into my mug. I was a person who found a place to be loud without witnesses. She nodded. Now say it without being pretty. I cheated, I said. I lied. She nodded. Now add the part where you remember he's not a judge, he's a person. I'm sorry, I said. I want to tell you everything and also protect you from the parts that don't help. I'll answer the questions you actually ask, not the ones I'm being dramatic about. I told Louis on a Tuesday afternoon because big honesty should have sunlight on it. He sat, legs open, elbows on knees, the posture of men waiting for bad news in corridors. I told him about the cabin, the annex, the nail in the doorway, the frog chorus that made me feel like my lungs had friends. I told him about Finn's mouth and my mouth and the night the creek got involved. I didn't tell him what color the sheets were, he didn't ask. I told him I had been coming back. I told him I didn't want to keep coming back. I told him if he wanted me to leave, I would pack like a professional and not cry on the good towels. He did not break the table. He did not throw the glitter. He looked at the floor for a very long time, then at me like a man trying to hear a bird hidden behind too many leaves. I thought I was boring you, he said finally, like the smallest boy. You weren't the problem, I said. I was. I was bored with the version of me that behaves when the kettle clicks. He swallowed like a person carrying a new tooth. Do you want to stay, he asked. It was not begging. It was data collection. Yes, I said, and felt the blue shirt in my bag become heavier than a shirt. We made a plan that didn't feel like penance so much as recalibration. I sent an email to my department declining any more solo trips to the Hermitage for 6 months and recommending interns go in pairs with better radios. I texted Finn, I told him, go build the hall. I hope the timber sings. He replied, I will hang the blue shirt on the nail for once. I cried in the veggie aisle at the grocer because onions and regret look similar at the right angle. And Louis and I, God bless our earnest, embarrassing hearts, we started taking dusk walks. We went to the little remnant bush behind our flats, the kind with an interpretive sign about regenerating understory, and we listened for fairy wrens quarreling like couples who have decided to stay anyway. It wasn't all therapy and noble recommitment. There were days when I wanted to drive until the bitumen gave up and live in a cabin with bad decisions and good acoustics. There were nights when Louis turned away and I stared at his spine like it was a cliff I might deserve to fall from. There were awkward grocery runs where we both reached for the same brand of yogurt and laughed like we'd invented marriage in a lab and it leaked. But there were also mornings he made coffee and put it near my cheek so I'd feel the steam before I saw it. There were afternoons he came to the lab and let my students show him spectrograms of bat calls and he said, it looks like weather, and they loved him for it. There was a Saturday we drove to a reserve with a boardwalk and held hands and listened to a chorus of pobblebonks do their comic timing and I did not think about a nail. Finn sent one last message before he went south. A photo of the blue shirt on the doorway nail, sleeves hanging like tired flags. No caption. I stared at it a long time, then set my phone down and told Louis I was going to make pasta badly and would he please rescue the sauce at an appropriate moment. I'm not going to hand you a morality play, I will give you a practice. If you find yourself in a forest where the microphones are capturing more than birdsong, ask yourself whose breath you're trying to match. If you keep saying I'm innocent while packing a bag that knows the route in the dark, say a different sentence and see if the road argues less. Hang something real on the nail. A receipt. A letter you actually send. A set of keys you return. Some nights I still dream in creeks. I wake with the shape of a cabin in my teeth. On those mornings I take the small recorder Lewis bought me, not for work, just for fun, and we go to the remnant bush and sit. I record our ordinary neighborhood birds, miners being rude, lorikeets auditioning, the secretive click of a thornbill you only learn when you decide to sit still longer than your shame. I show him the waveform and say, that bump is us not talking for a minute, and he says, sometimes silence is the only honest instrument, and I kiss him in the kind of light that forgives, and somewhere south a man with a plane of wood in his hands opens a door and lets the cold in and calls it by its right name. I said I was innocent because innocence sounds like a soft blanket you can nap under after a rough week. I am not innocent. I am present, which is harder and louder and requires more batteries. The forest keeps singing whether I show up or not. But when I do, with my imperfect microphones and my imperfect mouth, I try to make a record that doesn't pretend the creek isn't carrying every sound downstream. And then I go home and the kettle clicks and I stay until it whistles and I pour and we sit and the morning makes a sound I have finally learned to love without needing the deck to tilt.